Blackwells Passion. Lady Rosamond of Whitmore had always been the dutiful daughter until she was forced to wed Sir Hugh Fitzalan, a battle-worn knight with haunted eyes. She expected coldness, but when he touched her hand, his voice was quiet. "You do not want this marriage," he murmured. "Then why do your eyes betray you? Please let me know if this table of contents meets your approval. If so, you can issue the command, and I will generate the first chapter." Chapter 1. The Reluctant Bride. The chill of the stone floor seeped through Rosamond's thin slippers, mirroring the coldness that had settled in her heart. Whitmore Castle, her ancestral home, had always been a sanctuary, a place of warmth and laughter, filled with the scent of baking bread and the comforting murmur of familiar voices. Today, it felt like a gilded cage, its tapestries depicting scenes of heroic knights and courtly love a cruel mockery of her own fate. She looked out the narrow window, the gray November sky pressing down like a heavy shroud. The wind whipped across the barren fields, scattering the last of the autumn leaves, a visual echo of her own scattered hopes. She was Lady Rosamond of Whitmore, and in a few short hours, she would be Lady Rosamond Fitzalan, wife to a man she barely knew, a knight whose name was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear, Sir Hugh Fitzalan. The marriage had been arranged, a strategic alliance forged by her father, Baron Whitmore, to secure their lands against the encroaching threat of Lord Elmsworth, a ruthless neighbor with a covetous eye and a reputation for cruelty. Rosamond understood the necessity, the weight of duty that rested upon her slender shoulders. She was the only child, the sole heir to Whitmore's legacy, and her marriage was the price of its survival. Yet, understanding did not quell the rebellion that simmered beneath her placid exterior. She had dreamt of love, of a gentle hand, a kind smile, a shared glance across a crowded room. She had dreamt of a husband who would see her, not just as a pawn in a political game, but as a woman with her own desires and fears. Sir Hugh, from the brief, unsettling glimpses she'd had of him, seemed anything but gentle. He was a warrior, hardened by battle, his face etched with lines that spoke of hardship and loss. His eyes, a deep, unsettling gray, held a haunted quality, a shadow that seemed to consume the light. Her maid, Alara, a woman who had been more mother than servant, bustled around the room, fussing with the folds of Rosamond's gown. It was a magnificent creation of deep blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread depicting the Whitmore crest, a soaring falcon. The fabric felt heavy, constricting, like the chains of obligation that bound her. "You look beautiful, my lady," Alara said, her voice soft with a forced cheerfulness that did not reach her eyes. Rosamond knew Alara disapproved of the match, had seen the tears in her eyes when the betrothal was announced. Alara had hoped for a different future for her, a gentler one. Rosamond managed a weak smile.
"Thank you, Alara."
She caught her reflection in the polished silver mirror. Her face was pale, framed by her dark, braided hair. Her eyes, usually of vibrant green, were clouded with a mixture of resignation and fear. She looked like a stranger, a ghost of the woman she once was, a woman who had dared to dream of a life beyond duty. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor. Rosamond's heart clenched. It was time. Her father entered the room, his face a mask of stern authority, softened only slightly by a flicker of paternal concern. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair and green eyes as his daughter, though his were now streaked with gray. "Rosamond," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "It is time. Sir Hugh awaits." He offered her his arm, and she took it, her hand trembling slightly. As they walked through the long corridors of the castle, the portraits of her ancestors seemed to gaze down at her, their painted eyes filled with silent judgment. She felt the weight of their legacy, the centuries of Whitmore history pressing down on her. She was carrying their hopes, their dreams, their very survival on her shoulders. The great hall was filled with guests. Nobles from neighboring estates, knights in shining armor, ladies in their finest gowns. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the nervous energy of a gathering that was more political maneuver than celebration. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as Rosamund and her father entered. At the far end of the hall, standing before the makeshift altar, was Sir Hugh Fitzalan. He was taller than she remembered, his broad shoulders accentuated by the dark tunic he wore, embroidered with the silver lion of his own house. His hair was dark, almost black, and his face, though stern, possessed a rugged handsomeness that she had not noticed before. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of a stormy sea, and as they met hers, she saw not coldness, but a deep, unsettling sadness, a reflection of her own inner turmoil. As she approached, he stepped forward, his movements graceful despite the heavy sword that hung at his side. He took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, his fingers calloused but warm. The contact sent a shiver through her, a strange mixture of fear and something else, something she could not name. He leaned closer, his voice a low murmur meant only for her ears. "You do not want this marriage," he stated, his voice holding no trace of accusation, merely a quiet observation. Rosamund's breath caught in her throat. She had expected coldness, indifference, perhaps even disdain. But not this understanding. She looked up at him, searching his eyes, trying to decipher the enigma that was Sir Hugh Fitzalan. "Then why do your eyes betray you?" he continued, his gaze unwavering, holding hers captive. Rosamund's carefully constructed composure began to crack. She felt a tear, hot and unwelcome, trace a path down her cheek. His words, his quiet observation, had pierced through her defenses, exposing the raw vulnerability she had tried so desperately to conceal. The ceremony proceeded, the words of the priest washing over her, a blur of Latin phrases and solemn vows. But all she could see were Sir Hugh's eyes, his question hanging in the air, unanswered, a silent challenge that stirred something deep within her, a flicker of hope in the gathering darkness of her uncertain future. She must tell her father. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Stone Hall. The feast that followed the wedding ceremony was a lavish affair, a display of Whitmore's wealth and power intended to impress the assembled guests and, perhaps, to reassure Rosamund's father of the strength of the alliance he had forged. The great hall was ablaze with torchlight, the flames flickering against the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The long tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, venison pies, spiced apples, and endless flagons of wine. The air was thick with the sounds of boisterous laughter, clinking goblets, and the lively tunes of the minstrels. But Rosamund felt none of the merriment. She sat beside Sir Hugh at the high table, a silent observer of the revelry around her. He, too, seemed detached from the festivities, his gaze distant, his expression unreadable. He ate sparingly, drank even less, and spoke only when spoken to, his replies brief and courteous. Rosamund found herself stealing glances at him, trying to penetrate the wall of reserve he had erected around himself. She noticed the details she had missed before. The fine lines around his eyes, etched not just by hardship, but also by a certain weariness, a resignation that resonated with her own. The way his hand, calloused and strong, rested lightly on the table, never clenched, never fidgeting, as if he were accustomed to long periods of stillness, of waiting. She noticed the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a pale line against his tanned skin, a silent testament to a past battle, a past wound. The whispers began subtly, a low hum that rippled through the hall, barely audible above the din of the feast. Rosamund, acutely aware of her new position, of the scrutiny she was under, caught snippets of conversations, hushed tones, and furtive glances. "They say he has cursed lost his first wife in childbirth, a haunted man." Whitmore's folly, the words, though fragmented, stung like poisoned darts. She knew the rumors that surrounded Sir Hugh, the tales of his battlefield prowess, his unwavering loyalty to the king, and the shadow of tragedy that seemed to cling to him. She had dismissed them as idle gossip, the product of jealous rivals and superstitious minds. But now, sitting beside him, feeling the weight of his silence, the palpable aura of sadness that enveloped him. She wondered if there was more truth to the whispers than she had allowed herself to believe. A group of noble women, their faces flushed with wine and gossip, approached the high table. Lady Beatrice, a sharp-tongued woman with a reputation for malice, smiled sweetly at Rosamond. "My dear Lady Fitzalan," she purred, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look pale. Are you feeling quite well? Marriage to a knight can be taxing, especially one with Sir Hugh's history." Rosamond stiffened, her pride warring with her unease. "I am perfectly well, Lady Beatrice. Thank you for your concern." Lady Beatrice's smile widened, revealing a hint of cruelty.
Of course, my dear. We all wish you well.
It is just we worry. Sir Hugh is not known for his domestic bliss. Before Rosamond could retort, Sir Hugh spoke, his voice low and steady, but with an underlying steel that silenced Lady Beatrice instantly. "My wife is under my protection, Lady Beatrice. Your concern, while appreciated, is unnecessary." Lady Beatrice paled, her smile faltering. She murmured a hasty apology and retreated, her companions scattering like startled birds. Rosamond looked at Sir Hugh, surprised by his defense of her. He had spoken without anger, without raising his voice, yet his words had carried a weight that had silenced the gossiping noblewomen. She felt a flicker of gratitude, a warmth that surprised her. He turned to her, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Pay them no heed, my lady. They are vultures, feeding on scraps of rumor and speculation." But the rumors Rosamond began, then hesitated, unsure how to voice her questions, her fears. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "There is truth in some of them, I will not deny it. But there is also much that is exaggerated, distorted, or simply false. My past is complex. It is not a tale I share lightly." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the flickering flames of the torches. "I lost my first wife, Eleanor, many years ago. She died giving birth to our child, a son who did not survive. It was a difficult time." He spoke the words with a stark simplicity, a lack of embellishment that hinted at the depth of his pain, a pain that he had learned to bury deep within himself. Rosamond felt a pang of sympathy, a recognition of shared loss, though hers was of a different kind. She had lost her dreams, her freedom, to this marriage. He had lost something far more precious. The feast continued, the hours stretching on, an endless parade of food, drink, and forced merriment. But for Rosamond, the whispers in the stone hall had changed everything. They had revealed a glimpse of the man behind the night, a man burdened by a past he could not escape, a man who, despite his outward reserve, seemed to possess a capacity for both strength and vulnerability. And as she sat beside him, in the heart of the castle that was now their shared home, she felt the first stirrings of a new emotion, a hesitant curiosity, a desire to understand the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of Sir Hugh Fitzalan's haunted eyes. The night was growing old, but a different kind of chill was entering the hall, a chill of what might be. Chapter 3. The Night's Scar. The days that followed the wedding settled into a strange, unsettling rhythm. Whitmore Castle, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien, a place of watchful eyes and hushed whispers. Rosamond found herself navigating a complex web of relationships, trying to find her place within the household, to understand the expectations of her new role as Lady Fitzalan. Sir Hugh remained an enigma. He was present, yet distant, a constant presence in the castle, yet emotionally unreachable. He treated her with a formal courtesy, a respectful distance that both relieved and frustrated her. He was not cruel, not unkind, but he was not the husband she had once dreamt of, the man who would share her life, her thoughts, her fears. He spent much of his time in the training yard, honing his skills with sword and lance, or in the stables, tending to his warhorse, a magnificent black stallion named Shadow. Rosamond watched him from afar, observing the way he moved, the effortless grace of a seasoned warrior, the quiet authority he commanded over the men at arms. She saw the respect, even fear, in their eyes, and she wondered if she would ever truly know the man beneath the armor, the man behind the legend. One morning, she found him in the castle library, a room she had always loved, a sanctuary filled with the scent of old parchment and leather-bound books. He was standing by the window, gazing out at the misty landscape, his back to her. He did not seem to notice her presence. She hesitated, unsure whether to intrude. But something compelled her to speak, a need to break through the wall of silence that separated them. "It is a beautiful view," she said softly, her voice echoing in the stillness of the room. He turned, startled, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword, a reflex honed by years of battle. He relaxed when he saw it was her, his gray eyes softening slightly. "My lady," he said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. "I did not hear you enter." "I often come here," she said, gesturing towards the shelves filled with books. "It is a place of peace." He nodded, his gaze returning to the window. "It is a place of escape, for some." She noticed then that he was holding a small, leather-bound book in his hand. It looked old, worn, its pages filled with faded script. "What are you reading?" she asked, curious. He hesitated, then held out the book to her. "It is a journal. My father's." Rosamund took the book, her fingers tracing the worn leather. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a record of Sir Hugh's father's life, his campaigns, his thoughts, his hopes and fears. "He was a knight, too?" she asked. "Yes," Sir Hugh said, his voice tinged with a hint of pride. "A good man. A brave man. He died defending his king." Rosamund closed the book, handing it back to him. "I am sorry." He took the book, his fingers lingering on the cover. "He taught me everything I know. About honor, about duty, about sacrifice." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the scar that bisected his eyebrow. He touched it lightly, his fingers tracing the pale line. "This," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This was from a battle long ago. I was young, reckless. My father, he saved my life. He took the blow that was meant for me." Rosamund's breath caught in her throat. She understood now. The weight of his past, the burden of his father's sacrifice, the shadow that haunted his eyes. He was living not just for himself, but for the memory of his father, for the legacy of his house. "He must have been very proud of you," she said softly. Sir Hugh looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else, something she could not quite decipher. It was a look that spoke of vulnerability, of a longing for connection, a longing that mirrored her own. "He would have wanted me to be happy," he said, his voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between them, a tentative step towards understanding. Rosamund felt a surge of empathy, a desire to reach out to him, to ease the burden he carried. "And are you Sir Hugh?" she asked, her voice soft, but the question was a lance, probing. He looked at her a moment, the question unanswered, reflecting in the gray depths of his eyes. He closed the journal tightly. The wind began to howl outside, rattling the window panes, as though nature itself were holding its breath, waiting for an answer that seemed lost in the echoing silence of the ancient library. She shivered, not from the cold. Chapter 4. A Falcon's Flight. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, as winter tightened its grip on the land. The fields surrounding Whitmore Castle lay dormant beneath a blanket of frost, the trees stark and bare against the gray sky. The wind howled through the battlements, a mournful sound that echoed Rosamund's own sense of isolation. She found solace in the small things, the everyday rituals of castle life. She oversaw the household staff, ensuring the smooth running of the kitchens, the storerooms, the weaving rooms. She spent time in the chapel, praying for guidance, for strength, for a way to bridge the chasm that separated her from her husband. Sir Hugh remained a distant figure, a shadow flitting through the corridors, his presence felt more than seen. He continued his rigorous training regime, his dedication to his knightly duties unwavering. He spoke little, his thoughts seemingly consumed by matters she could not fathom. One crisp, clear morning, Rosamund ventured out into the courtyard. The air was sharp and cold, but the sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow on the snow-covered ground. She saw Sir Hugh standing near the stables, talking to his falconer, a grizzled old man named Gareth. Rosamund had always loved falconry, the ancient art of hunting with birds of prey. Her father had taught her to fly falcons when she was a young girl, and she had found a sense of freedom and exhilaration in watching the birds soar through the sky, their keen eyes searching for their quarry. She approached Sir Hugh and Gareth, drawn by the sight of the magnificent falcon perched on Gareth's gloved hand. It was a peregrine, a bird of breathtaking beauty, with dark, piercing eyes and feathers the color of slate gray and snow white. "She is beautiful," Rosamund said, her voice filled with admiration. Sir Hugh turned, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had not expected to see her there. "Her name is Lyra," he said, his voice softening slightly. "She is one of the finest falcons in the realm." Gareth, a man of few words, nodded in agreement. "Aye, my lady. A true hunter." Rosamund reached out a gloved hand, and Lyra, after a moment of hesitation, stepped onto her wrist. The falcon's talons gripped her leather glove, its weight surprisingly substantial. She felt a connection to the bird, a sense of shared wildness, a longing for freedom. "May I fly her?" Rosamund asked, her voice hesitant. Sir Hugh looked at her, his gray eyes studying her intently. He seemed to be weighing her request, assessing her capabilities. "Have you flown falcons before, my lady?" he asked. "Yes," Rosamund replied. "My father taught me." He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Very well. But be careful. She is swift and powerful." He gave her a few instructions, showing her how to release the bird, how to call her back with a lure. Rosamund listened intently, her heart beating with anticipation. She walked out into the open field, Lyra perched on her wrist. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. Then, with a swift upward motion, she released the falcon. Lyra soared into the sky, her wings beating powerfully, her body a dark silhouette against the bright blue canvas. Rosamund watched her, her heart filled with a sense of awe and wonder. The falcon circled high above, her keen eyes scanning the ground below. Then, with a sudden stoop, she plunged towards the earth, a blur of feathers and speed. Rosamund held her breath, watching the falcon's breathtaking descent. Lyra struck her quarry, a small rabbit, with deadly accuracy. She landed gracefully, her talons firmly gripping her prey. Rosamund called the falcon back with the lure, a small piece of meat attached to a leather cord. Lyra responded instantly, returning to her wrist, her eyes bright with triumph. Rosamund felt a surge of exhilaration, a sense of accomplishment. She had flown the falcon, had shared a moment of wildness and freedom with the magnificent bird. She looked at Sir Hugh, who had been watching her intently. He was smiling, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his stern face, making him look younger, less burdened. "You have a natural talent, my lady," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Your father taught you well." Rosamund felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of connection to her husband that she had not experienced before. It was a shared moment of joy, a brief respite from the shadows that surrounded them.
"Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "It was exhilarating."
He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "Perhaps we could fly together, sometime." The offer, tentative as it was, surprised her. It was the first time he had suggested doing something together, something beyond the formal duties of their marriage. "I would like that," she said, her heart beating faster. As they walked back towards the castle, Lyra perched contentedly on Rosamund's wrist. She felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile seed of possibility. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to bridge the distance between them, to find a connection beyond the constraints of duty and obligation. Perhaps, like the falcon soaring through the sky, they could find a way to break free from the shadows that bound them, to find a new kind of freedom, together. A sudden gust of wind swept down, and a cloud covered the sun. Chapter 5. The Tournament of Shadows. News arrived at Whitmore Castle of a grand tournament to be held at Lord Ashworth's neighboring estate. It was a significant event, a gathering of nobles and knights from across the region, a display of martial prowess and courtly splendor. For Sir Hugh, it was an obligation, a duty to represent his house and demonstrate his loyalty to the king. For Rosamond, it was an opportunity, a chance to escape the confines of Whitmore, to see a different world, to perhaps understand her husband better. The preparations for the tournament consumed the castle. Armor was polished, swords were sharpened, banners were unfurled. The air was thick with anticipation, with the nervous energy of men preparing for competition, for the possibility of glory or defeat. Rosamond oversaw the packing of their belongings, ensuring that Sir Hugh had everything he needed for the journey and the tournament. She chose her own gowns carefully, selecting colors and fabrics that would reflect her status as Lady Fitzalan, yet also express her own quiet elegance. Sir Hugh remained detached, his focus seemingly entirely on the upcoming competition. He spent hours in the training yard, practicing his swordsmanship, his jousting, his horsemanship. He spoke little, his thoughts seemingly consumed by strategy and preparation. Rosamond watched him, observing his dedication, his unwavering focus, his almost obsessive attention to detail. She wondered if he was driven by a desire for glory, by a need to prove himself, or by something deeper, something hidden beneath his stoic exterior. The journey to Ashworth Castle was long and arduous, the roads rough and muddy, the weather unpredictable. They traveled with a small retinue of knights and servants, a miniature court moving through the wintry landscape. Rosamond rode beside Sir Hugh, her presence a silent reminder of his responsibilities, of the alliance he had forged with Whitmore. They spoke little during the journey, their conversations limited to practical matters, to the logistics of travel, to the observations of the passing scenery. But Rosamond felt a growing sense of anticipation, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was entering a world she had only glimpsed from afar, a world of chivalry and courtly love, of intrigue and rivalry, of danger and opportunity. Ashworth Castle was a magnificent fortress, even grander than Whitmore, its towers soaring high above the surrounding countryside. The castle grounds were teeming with activity, with knights and nobles, ladies and servants, merchants and entertainers. Tents and pavilions had been erected, colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. The air was filled with the sounds of music, laughter, and the clatter of armor. Rosamond was introduced to Lord Ashworth, a powerful and ambitious nobleman with a reputation for both charm and ruthlessness. He greeted her with a courtly bow, his eyes assessing her with a mixture of admiration and calculation. She felt a flicker of unease, a sense of being scrutinized, of being judged. She was also introduced to Lady Ashworth, a beautiful and elegant woman with a sharp wit and a reputation for political maneuvering. Lady Ashworth greeted her with a polite smile, but Rosamond sensed a hint of rivalry, a subtle challenge in her eyes. The tournament began the following day, a spectacle of pageantry and skill. Knights in shining armor paraded before the assembled crowd, their horses prancing, their lances gleaming in the sunlight. The air was filled with the sounds of trumpets, drums, and the cheers of the spectators. Sir Hugh competed in several events, displaying his mastery of arms. He unhorsed several opponents in the joust, his lance striking true, his horsemanship impeccable. He fought with skill and courage in the melee, his sword a blur of motion, his movements precise and deadly. Rosamond watched him, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and fear. She saw the respect, even awe, in the eyes of the other knights, the admiration in the eyes of the ladies. But she also saw something else. She saw the darkness that still clung to him, the shadow that seemed to lurk beneath his stoic exterior. She saw the way his eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with a hint of something she could not quite name. It was a look of longing, regret, or perhaps a desperate need for something he could not find, something he had lost. The look was directed at a fair-haired woman who avoided his gaze. During a break in the competition, Rosamond found herself alone with Lady Ashworth. "Your husband is a formidable knight, Lady Fitzalan," Lady Ashworth said, her voice smooth and polite. "He is a credit to his house." Thank you, Lady Ashworth, Rosamund replied, her voice equally polite. But he seems distant, Lady Ashworth continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. Preoccupied. Is he happy in his marriage? Rosamund felt a surge of anger, a defensive instinct to protect her husband, despite the distance between them. Sir Hugh is a man of honor and duty, she replied, her voice carefully controlled. He fulfills his obligations. Lady Ashworth smiled, a knowing smile that chilled Rosamund to the bone. Of course, my dear. But sometimes obligations are not enough. Sometimes a man needs more than duty to sustain him. Lady Ashworth's words hung in the air, a subtle poison, a hint of something unspoken, something that stirred Rosamund's deepest fears. The tournament was a display of skill and courage, but beneath the surface, there were currents of intrigue, of rivalry, of hidden desires and unspoken betrayals. And Rosamund, caught in the midst of this complex web, felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that the shadows of the tournament were not just confined to the jousting field, but were reaching out to engulf her, to threaten the fragile foundations of her marriage, to challenge everything she thought she knew about her husband and herself. The wind seemed to change, growing icy. Chapter 6. Secrets of the Old Keep. The tournament concluded with a grand feast, a celebration of the victors, and a consolation for the defeated. The great hall of Ashworth Castle was ablaze with light, the tables laden with food and drink, the air filled with music and laughter. But Rosamund felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that something was amiss. Sir Hugh had performed admirably in the tournament, earning the respect of his peers and the admiration of the assembled nobles. But he remained distant, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere. He spoke little, his gaze often drifting towards a particular corner of the hall, where a group of knights were gathered, their conversation hushed, their expressions serious. Rosamund recognized one of the knights as Sir Gareth of Blackwood, a man known for his loyalty to Lord Elmsworth, their neighbor and rival. She also noticed the glances that passed between Sir Hugh and the fair-haired woman she had seen earlier, a woman she now knew to be Lady Isolde, a distant cousin of Lord Ashworth. The looks were fleeting, barely perceptible, but they spoke volumes. Rosamund felt a pang of jealousy, a sharp, unfamiliar pain that surprised her with its intensity. She had not expected to feel this way, had not allowed herself to entertain the possibility of romantic feelings for her husband. But the sight of him looking at another woman, with a longing she had never seen directed at her, stirred something deep within her, a mixture of hurt and anger. Later that evening, as the festivities were winding down, Rosamund found herself alone on a balcony overlooking the castle courtyard. The night was cold and clear, the stars shining brightly in the dark sky. She wrapped her cloak around herself, seeking warmth against the chill, but the coldness she felt came from within, a growing sense of isolation and uncertainty. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Sir Hugh approaching. He looked weary, his face etched with lines of fatigue, his eyes shadowed. "My lady," he said, his voice low and quiet. "I did not expect to find you here." "I needed some air," she replied, her voice equally quiet. He stood beside her, gazing out at the courtyard below. The sounds of the revelry from the great hall drifted up to them, a muted echo of the celebration they were both avoiding. "The tournament is over," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes," she replied. "You performed admirably." He did not respond, his silence a heavy presence between them. Rosamund took a deep breath, steeling herself to ask the questions that had been gnawing at her. "Who is Lady Isolde?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He stiffened, his gaze turning sharply towards her. He seemed surprised by her question, caught off guard. "She is a distant relative of Lord Ashworth," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "And?" Rosamund pressed, her voice insistent. He hesitated, his gaze drifting away from her. "And she was a friend. A long time ago." The words, spoken so simply, so quietly, carried a weight of unspoken meaning. Rosamund felt a coldness settle in her heart, a confirmation of her fears. "A friend?" she repeated, her voice laced with a hint of bitterness. Or something more. He turned to her, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. She was someone I cared for, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Before Eleanor. Before my first marriage. He paused, his gaze searching her face. It was a long time ago. It is in the past. But Rosamund knew that the past was not always so easily buried. She had seen the looks that passed between them, the unspoken longing, the lingering connection. Is that why you were speaking with Sir Gareth of Blackwood? She asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. Is there some secret between you? Something to do with Lord Elmsworth? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sudden alarm. What do you know of Lord Elmsworth? He asked, his voice sharp. Only that he is our neighbor, she said. And our enemy. He seemed to relax slightly, his guard lowering. He is a dangerous man, Rosamund. A threat to Whitmore, to everything your father has built. I am gathering information, trying to understand his plans. He paused, his gaze searching her face. You must trust me, my lady. I would never do anything to betray Whitmore, to betray you. The words, spoken with such sincerity, such earnestness, stirred something within her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him. But the secrets she had glimpsed, the whispers she had heard, the looks she had seen, all cast a shadow of doubt, a cloud of uncertainty over her heart. As the night drew in, the shadows of the old keep seemed to close around them. She felt a growing sense of unease, a conviction. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Kiss. The journey back to Whitmore was fraught with a tension that Rosamund could almost taste. The air between her and Sir Hugh was thick with unspoken words, with suspicion and a burgeoning, fragile trust that seemed to teeter on the edge of a precipice. The vibrant tapestry of the tournament, the glittering armor and courtly manners, had faded, leaving behind a residue of unease and the stark reality of their precarious situation. Rosamund replayed the conversations, the glances, the subtle hints she had gathered at Ashworth Castle. Lady Isolde's presence, the hushed conversation with Sir Gareth of Blackwood, Sir Hugh's evasiveness all pointed to a hidden layer of intrigue that she could not yet decipher. She felt like a pawn in a game she did not understand, a game where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Upon their return, Whitmore Castle felt different, colder. The familiar comfort of its stone walls and roaring fires seemed to offer little solace against the growing chill within her heart. Sir Hugh resumed his duties, his focus seemingly entirely on the defense of the castle, on training his men, on strengthening their fortifications. He was present, yet distant, a constant reminder of the secrets he kept, of the gulf that separated them. One evening, Rosamund found him in the solar, a small, private room where he often worked on matters of state. He was poring over maps, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on his face, accentuating the lines of worry and fatigue. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to intrude. But something compelled her to speak, a need to break through the wall of silence that had grown between them. "Hugh," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, startled, his hand instinctively moving to his sword, a reflex honed by years of battle. He relaxed when he saw it was her, his gray eyes softening slightly. "Rosamund," he said, his voice weary. "Is something amiss?" I need to understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What is happening? What are you hiding from me?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. He pushed the maps aside, his gaze meeting hers. "I am not hiding anything from you, Rosamund," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I am protecting you. Protecting Whitmore." "From Lord Elmsworth?" she asked. He nodded. "He is a dangerous man. He covets your lands, your castle. He will stop at nothing to achieve his goals." "And Lady Isolde?" she pressed, her voice laced with a hint of pain. "What is her role in all of this?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting away from her. "Isolde is a pawn, just like we all are." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. She was betrothed to me many years ago, before Eleanor, before everything changed. The words, spoken so softly, so reluctantly, struck Rosamund like a physical blow. She had known, had suspected, but hearing the truth, hearing the confirmation of his past connection to Lady Isolde, was more painful than she had anticipated. Betrothed? She repeated, her voice trembling. But why did it not happen? He looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. Her father, Lord Ashworth's brother, betrayed my father. He sided with our enemies in a dispute over land. The betrothal was broken. There was bad blood between our families. He paused, his gaze searching her face. Isolde, she was innocent. She had no part in her father's treachery. But it was impossible. We could not be together. Rosamund felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pity for the young lovers torn apart by their family's feud, anger at the injustice of it all, and a lingering jealousy, a fear that the past still held a power over Sir Hugh's heart. And now? She asked, her voice barely audible. What is she to you now? He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else, something she could not quite decipher. She is a link to the past, he said, his voice heavy with unspoken meaning. And perhaps a key to the future. He reached out and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, his fingers calloused but warm. The contact sent a shiver through her, a strange mixture of fear and desire. I need your trust, Rosamund, he said, his voice earnest, his gaze unwavering. I am walking a dangerous path, but I do it for Whitmore, for you. I need you to believe in me. His words hung in the air, a plea, a promise, a challenge. But, at that moment, a servant burst into the room, shattering the fragile intimacy. My lord, my lady, riders approach. They bear the crest of Elmsworth. The world contracted. Chapter 8. By Candlelight and Treachery. The news of the approaching riders bearing Elmsworth's crest sent a wave of cold dread through Whitmore Castle. The sudden intrusion shattered the fragile moment of near confession between Rosamund and Sir Hugh, replacing it with the stark reality of their precarious situation. The air, which had moments before held the weight of unspoken words, now crackled with tension and the imminence of danger. Sir Hugh reacted instantly, his warrior instincts taking over. He released Rosamund's hand, his expression hardening, his eyes turning sharp and focused. Get to the inner keep, Rosamund, he commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. Stay there until I send word. Alara will go with you. Rosamund wanted to protest, to stay by his side, to understand what was happening. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the unwavering focus on the defense of their home, and she knew that she had to obey. She nodded, her heart pounding with fear, and turned to leave. Hugh, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Be careful. He looked at her, his gray eyes softening for a brief moment. I will, he said, his voice a low murmur. Go now. She hurried from the solar, Alara close behind her. The castle was in a state of controlled chaos. Men at arms were rushing to their posts, their armor clanking, their swords drawn. The sounds of shouting, of hurried footsteps, of the clang of metal echoed through the corridors. Rosamund and Alara reached the inner keep, the most secure part of the castle, a haven of thick stone walls and heavy iron doors. Other women and children were already gathered there, their faces pale with fear, their whispers a constant hum of anxiety. Rosamund found a small alcove, a niche in the stone wall, where she could be alone with her thoughts. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill, but the coldness she felt came from within, a deep-seated fear for Hugh, for Whitmore, for their future. The hours stretched on, an eternity of waiting, of listening to the sounds of activity outside, of trying to decipher the meaning of the distant shouts, the clang of metal, the occasional scream. Rosamund prayed, her lips moving silently, her heart filled with a desperate plea for protection, for guidance, for strength. As darkness fell, a servant arrived with a flickering candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The light, though meager, offered a small measure of comfort, a fragile beacon in the surrounding darkness. Rosamund learned from the servant that the riders bearing Elmsworth's crest had not been an attacking force, but a messenger, carrying a demand for a parley. Lord Elmsworth had requested a meeting with Sir Hugh to discuss matters of mutual interest. The news filled Rosamund with a mixture of relief and apprehension. A parley was better than an attack, but it also meant that Sir Hugh would be facing Lord Elmsworth, a man known for his treachery and ruthlessness, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Hours later, long after the castle had fallen silent, Sir Hugh finally returned. Rosamund rushed to meet him, her heart pounding with relief. He looked weary, his face etched with lines of fatigue, his clothes dusty and stained. But he was alive, unharmed. What happened? She asked, her voice trembling. What did Elmsworth want? He led her to a small chamber within the inner keep, a private space where they could speak without being overheard. He lit a few more candles, the flames casting a warm glow on his face, revealing the exhaustion in his eyes. He wants to negotiate, Sir Hugh said, his voice low and weary. He claims he has information. Information that could be damaging to Whitmore. What kind of information? Rosamund asked, her voice filled with apprehension. He hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers. He claims he has proof that your father was involved in a plot against the king. Years ago. The words struck Rosamund like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. That's impossible, she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and outrage. My father would never. He was loyal to the king. He died defending the king. Sir Hugh looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else, something she could not quite decipher. I know, he said, his voice soft. But Elmsworth, he has a reputation for fabricating evidence, for using lies and deception to achieve his goals. He paused, his gaze searching her face. He wants a trade. He will keep the information secret in exchange for Whitmore. The words hung in the air, a chilling ultimatum, a serpent's kiss of treachery and betrayal. Rosamund felt a coldness spread through her, a sense of being trapped, of being cornered. She looked at Sir Hugh, her eyes searching his, seeking answers, seeking reassurance, seeking a way out of the darkness that was closing in around them. The candles flickered, threatening to go out. Chapter 9. A plea in the chapel. The weight of Elmsworth's ultimatum hung over Whitmore Castle like a shroud. The threat to her father's memory, the potential loss of her ancestral home, the insidious web of treachery that surrounded them all combined to create a suffocating atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Rosamund felt as though the very foundations of her world were crumbling, leaving her adrift in a sea of doubt and despair. Sir Hugh had withdrawn into himself, his focus seemingly entirely on preparing for the worst. He spent hours in the training yard, honing his skills, drilling his men, strengthening the castle's defenses. He spoke little, his thoughts consumed by strategy and contingency plans. Rosamund watched him, observing his dedication, his unwavering commitment to protecting Whitmore, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. But she also saw the weariness in his eyes, the burden he carried, the weight of the impossible choice he faced. She found herself drawn to the castle chapel, a small, intimate space dedicated to prayer and reflection. The chapel was a haven of peace, a sanctuary from the turmoil that engulfed the rest of the castle. The air was cool and still, the only sound the gentle flicker of the candles that burned before the altar. The stained glass windows, depicting scenes from the lives of saints, cast colored light on the stone floor, creating a mosaic of beauty and serenity. Rosamund knelt before the altar, her hands clasped in prayer, her heart filled with a desperate plea for guidance, for strength, for a way out of the darkness that surrounded them. She prayed for her father's memory, for the safety of Whitmore, for the well-being of Sir Hugh, for the strength to face whatever the future held. As she prayed, she became aware of a presence beside her. She looked up and saw Sir Hugh standing there, his head bowed, his expression somber. He had entered the chapel silently, without her noticing. He knelt beside her, his presence a comfort, a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden they carried. They remained there for a long time, kneeling in silence, their prayers mingling, their hopes and fears intertwining. Finally, Sir Hugh spoke, his voice low and quiet. "I do not know what to do, Rosamund," he said, his voice filled with a raw honesty that she had rarely heard from him. "I am torn. I cannot betray your father's memory, but I cannot sacrifice Whitmore. Sacrifice you." The words, spoken with such vulnerability, such despair, touched Rosamund deeply. She saw the pain in his eyes, the anguish he felt, the weight of the impossible choice he faced. "There must be another way," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There must be something we can do." He looked at her, his gray eyes searching hers. "I have considered every option," he said, his voice weary. "Elmsworth holds all the cards. He has us trapped." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the stained glass windows, towards the depictions of saints who had faced their own trials, their own tribulations. "I have thought of challenging him," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Of fighting him to the death." Rosamund's heart clenched with fear. She knew that Sir Hugh was a skilled warrior, a formidable opponent. But she also knew that Lord Elmsworth was a ruthless and cunning adversary, a man who would not hesitate to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. "No," she said, her voice firm, her hand reaching out to grasp his. "That is not the answer. There must be another way." Her touch, the warmth of her hand in his, seemed to break through his despair. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "Perhaps," he said, his voice hesitant. "Perhaps there is. But it will require a sacrifice. A different kind of sacrifice." He paused, his gaze searching her face. "I need your help, Rosamund. I need your strength. I need your trust." "You have always had my trust," she responded, her voice filled with conviction, belying the questions that still swirled within. "Tell me." He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "There is someone who might be able to help us. Someone who has influence over Elmsworth. Someone who knows his secrets." The candlelight illuminated a new resolve, and a dangerous one. It was clear. He was going to speak with Lady Isolde. Chapter 10. The Raven's Omen. The decision to seek Lady Isolde's help hung heavy in the air, a desperate gamble born of necessity and a fragile hope. Rosamund understood the risks, the potential for betrayal, the delicate dance between trust and suspicion that defined their every move. Yet, she also saw the flicker of determination in Sir Hugh's eyes, the unwavering resolve to protect Whitmore, to protect her, even if it meant walking a dangerous path. The journey to Lady Isolde's estate was shrouded in secrecy. Sir Hugh chose a small, trusted escort, men who had proven their loyalty time and again. He left Rosamund in charge of Whitmore, a testament to his faith in her strength and judgment, a burden that she accepted with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. Before he departed, he sought her out in the castle gardens, a place where they had shared a rare moment of connection, a place where the beauty of nature offered a brief respite from the shadows that surrounded them. The winter air was crisp and cold, the ground covered in a thin layer of frost, the trees bare and stark against the gray sky. "I do not know how long I will be gone," he said, his voice low and quiet. "But I will return. I promise you." Rosamund looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something she could no longer deny. She had grown to admire him, to respect him, to care for him, in a way she had never anticipated. "Be careful, Hugh," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Isolde, she is a part of your past, a past that still holds power over you." He nodded, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken meaning. "But she is also a key to unlocking Elmsworth's secrets, to finding a way out of this trap." He reached out and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, his fingers calloused but warm. The contact sent a shiver through her, a familiar spark of connection that defied the fear and uncertainty that surrounded them. "Trust me, Rosamund," he said, his voice earnest, his gaze unwavering. "I will not betray you." I will not betray Whitmore. She nodded, her heart filled with a fragile hope, a belief in his strength, in his honor, in his love. She dared not name the emotion, dared not acknowledge the depth of her feelings, not yet, not until the shadows that surrounded them had lifted. He released her hand, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment longer. Then, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the misty landscape, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable tension. Rosamund oversaw the castle's defenses, ensuring that everything was in order, that the men at arms were prepared for any eventuality. She spent hours in the chapel, praying for Sir Hugh's safe return, for a resolution to their predicament, for a future free from the threat of Lord Elmsworth. One morning, as she was walking along the castle ramparts, she saw a raven perched on the battlements. The bird was large and black, its feathers gleaming in the sunlight, its eyes dark and piercing. It was a bird of ill omen, a symbol of death and destruction. Rosamund felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition of danger, a sense of foreboding. She tried to dismiss it as superstition, as the product of her own anxieties, but the feeling persisted, a nagging doubt that gnawed at her heart. She tried contacting the nearby monastery, a day's ride, in order to glean more information. Later that evening, as she was sitting alone in the solar, reviewing the castle's accounts, a servant arrived with a message. It was a small, sealed scroll, bearing the crest of Lady Isolde. Rosamund's heart pounded with anticipation and fear. She broke the seal and unrolled the scroll, her hands trembling slightly. The message was brief, written in a delicate, feminine hand. He is safe, but the situation is complex. I need to see you. Come to Oakhaven Manor. Alone. The words, though cryptic, filled Rosamund with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Sir Hugh was safe. That was the most important thing. But the message also hinted at a new layer of intrigue, a new level of danger. Isolde needed to see her. Alone. Rosamund knew that she had to go, that she had to face whatever awaited her at Oakhaven Manor. She had to trust Sir Hugh, had to trust Isolde, had to trust her own instincts. She had to find a way to save Whitmore, to save their future, to save the fragile bond that was growing between them, a bond that was threatened by the shadows of the past, by the treachery of the present, by the uncertainty of the future. The raven called from outside, the sound echoing, ominous. Chapter 11. Across the Wounded Fields. The journey to Oakhaven Manor was fraught with peril, both real and imagined. Rosamund, defying Sir Hugh's implicit instructions and Lady Isolde's explicit one, chose a single, trusted escort Elias, a grizzled, loyal guardsman who had served her father for many years and had taught Rosamund herself how to wield a dagger. She disguised herself as a simple traveling woman, her fine clothes replaced with a plain woolen dress and a hooded cloak, her dark hair hidden beneath a scarf. The landscape they traversed was bleak and unforgiving, the fields barren, the trees stark and bare against the gray sky. The winter air was biting, the wind whipping across the open countryside, carrying with it the scent of snow and the distant echo of wolves howling. Rosamund felt a constant sense of unease, a premonition of danger, a feeling of being watched. They avoided the main roads, sticking to less traveled paths, winding their way through forests and across frozen streams. They encountered few travelers, mostly peasants huddled in their cloaks, their faces etched with hardship and worry. The land itself seemed to reflect the turmoil in Rosamund's heart, the uncertainty of her future, the weight of the secrets she carried. As they neared Oakhaven Manor, the landscape changed. The barren fields gave way to rolling hills, dotted with ancient oak trees, their branches gnarled and twisted, their leaves long gone. The manor itself was a sprawling structure of gray stone, surrounded by a high wall, its windows dark and unwelcoming. It looked more like a fortress than a home, a place of secrets and shadows. Rosamund and Elias approached the manor cautiously, their eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of danger. They found a small, hidden gate at the rear of the wall, a postern gate used by servants and tradesmen. Elias, using skills honed over years of service, managed to pick the lock, and they slipped inside unnoticed. The manor grounds were deserted, the gardens overgrown and neglected, the fountains frozen and silent. The air was still and cold, the only sound the rustle of the wind through the bare branches of the trees. Rosamund felt a growing sense of apprehension, a feeling that she was walking into a trap. They made their way towards the main building, keeping to the shadows, their movements cautious and silent. They found an unlocked side door, leading into a dimly lit corridor. The interior of the manor was just as unwelcoming as the exterior, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay, the walls lined with faded tapestries and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. As they moved deeper into the manor, they heard voices, hushed tones coming from a room at the end of the corridor. Rosamund signaled to Elias to wait, and she crept forward, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She reached the doorway and peered inside. The room was a small library, lit by a single flickering candle, its shelves filled with leather-bound books. Sir Hugh was standing by the window, his back to her, his figure silhouetted against the dim light. Lady Isolde was sitting in a chair facing him, her face pale and drawn, her expression a mixture of anxiety and something else, something Rosamund could not quite decipher. Rosamund hesitated, unsure whether to reveal her presence. She wanted to hear their conversation, to understand what was happening, to unravel the secrets that surrounded them. She heard Sir Hugh speak, his voice low and strained. "You said you had information about Elmsworth." Lady Isolde nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I do," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it is dangerous. He would kill me if he knew I was telling you this." "Tell me," Sir Hugh urged, his voice firm. Lady Isolde took a deep breath, her gaze meeting his. "Elmsworth, he is not acting alone. He has allies. Powerful allies. Within the king's own court." The words, spoken so softly, so reluctantly, sent a chill down Rosamund's spine. She had suspected that Elmsworth was not acting alone, but to hear it confirmed, to hear that he had allies within the king's court, was a terrifying revelation. "Who?" Sir Hugh asked, his voice sharp. "Who are these allies?" Lady Isolde hesitated, her gaze darting around the room, as if she feared being overheard. I cannot say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not here. It is not safe. He has spies everywhere." She paused, her gaze meeting Sir Hugh's. "There is a place where we can speak freely, a place where we can plan. But you must trust me." That place, she said, was near the old battlefield, known as the Wounded Fields, for what had happened there. Rosamund, hidden in the shadows, felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Relief that Sir Hugh was alive and unharmed, fear at the implications of Lady Isolde's words, and a lingering jealousy, a suspicion that the past still held a power over their present, over their future. The wind seemed to whisper. Chapter 12. The Price of Loyalty. The Wounded Fields. The name itself evoked images of pain, loss, and the lingering ghosts of battles long past. It was a desolate, windswept plain, scarred by the memories of conflict, a place where the earth itself seemed to weep for the lives lost, the sacrifices made. Rosamund, Sir Hugh, and Lady Isolde, accompanied by Elias, arrived at the designated meeting place under the cover of a pale, pre-dawn sky. The air was frigid, the ground hard with frost, the silence broken only by the mournful cry of a distant crow. The meeting place was a ruined chapel, a crumbling structure of gray stone, its roof long gone, its walls scarred by time and weather. It stood alone on a small rise, overlooking the vast expanse of the Wounded Fields, a silent witness to the tragedies that had unfolded there. Rosamund shivered, not just from the cold, but from a sense of unease, a premonition of danger. Lady Isolde led them inside the ruined chapel, her movements hesitant, her eyes darting around nervously. She seemed to be on edge, her fear palpable. "We can speak freely here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No one comes here. It is a place of ghosts." Sir Hugh looked at her, his gray eyes searching hers. "Tell me what you know, Isolde. Tell me about Elmsworth's allies." Lady Isolde took a deep breath, her gaze meeting his. "Elmsworth's main ally is Lord Markham," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The king's own advisor." The name struck Rosamund like a physical blow. Lord Markham was one of the most powerful men in the realm, a trusted advisor to the king, a man known for his wisdom and his influence. The revelation that he was in league with Elmsworth was a terrifying prospect, a sign that the conspiracy reached the very heart of the kingdom. "Markham?" Sir Hugh repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "Are you certain?" Lady Isolde nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "I am certain," she said, her voice barely audible. "I have seen letters, heard conversations. He is the one orchestrating everything."
"But why?"
Rosamund asked, her voice trembling. "Why would Markham betray the king?" Lady Isolde hesitated, her gaze drifting towards the ruined altar, towards the remnants of a faded fresco depicting a scene of judgment. "He believes the king is weak," she said, her voice low and strained. "He believes a stronger hand is needed. He plans to replace him with someone more amenable to his influence." The words, spoken so softly, so reluctantly, revealed the true scope of the conspiracy, the depth of the treachery that surrounded them. It was not just about Whitmore, about Lord Elmsworth's greed. It was about the throne itself, about a plot to overthrow the king, to plunge the realm into chaos. "And the evidence against my father?" Rosamund asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope. "Is it real?" Lady Isolde looked at her, her eyes filled with pity. "I do not know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Elmsworth claims it is. But he is a liar. He would say anything to achieve his goals." She paused, her gaze meeting Sir Hugh's. "There is a way to expose Markham," she said, her voice gaining a flicker of strength. "To prove his treachery. But it will require a risk. A great risk." "What kind of risk?" Sir Hugh asked, his voice sharp. Lady Isolde took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "There is a document," she said, her voice low and intense. "A letter written by Markham, detailing his plans, his alliance with Elmsworth. It is hidden in his private chambers at the king's court." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a desperate gamble, a path fraught with peril. To retrieve the letter, to expose Markham, would require someone to infiltrate the king's court, to risk their life, their freedom, their very soul. "It is madness," said Elias, his voice low. Sir Hugh didn't reply, his gaze locked with Isolde's. Rosamund looked at Sir Hugh, her heart pounding with fear and admiration. She knew what he was thinking, what he was considering. He was a knight, a warrior, a man of honor and duty. He would not hesitate to risk his life to protect his king, to protect his realm, to protect her. "I will go," Sir Hugh said, his voice firm, his eyes filled with a steely resolve. The words, spoken so simply, so decisively, sealed their fate. The price of loyalty, the cost of truth, the weight of the shadows that surrounded them all converged in that moment, in that ruined chapel, on the desolate expanse of the wounded fields. A cold wind swept through the broken walls. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Forest. The decision to infiltrate the king's court hung heavy in the air, a perilous undertaking fraught with risk and uncertainty. Sir Hugh, driven by his unwavering loyalty to the crown and a desperate hope to clear Rosamund's father's name, prepared for the dangerous mission. Rosamund, torn between fear for his safety and a burgeoning admiration for his courage, resolved to support him in any way she could. Before embarking on the journey to the king's court, Sir Hugh decided to seek the counsel of Brother Thomas, a wise and trusted monk who resided at the secluded monastery nestled deep within the forest, a day's ride from Whitmore. Brother Thomas had been a confidant of Rosamund's father, a spiritual advisor who possessed a keen understanding of the political machinations that plagued the realm. Rosamund and Sir Hugh, accompanied by Elias, rode through the dense forest, the trees towering above them, their branches intertwined, creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight, casting long, dancing shadows on the forest floor. The air was cool and damp, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the muffled thud of their horses' hooves. As they rode, Rosamond reflected on the events of the past few weeks, on the whirlwind of emotions that had swept through her life. She had been a reluctant bride, a woman bound by duty, resigned to a life devoid of love and passion. But Sir Hugh, with his quiet strength, his haunted eyes, his unwavering commitment to honor, had stirred something within her, a spark of connection, a flicker of hope, a growing affection that she could no longer deny. She glanced at him, riding beside her, his face set in a determined expression, his gray eyes focused on the path ahead. She wondered what he was thinking, what fears and doubts he harbored beneath his stoic exterior. "Hugh," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you afraid?" He looked at her, his gray eyes softening slightly. "Yes," he admitted, his voice low and honest. "But I am more afraid of failing. Of failing to protect Whitmore. Of failing you." The words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, touched Rosamond deeply. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You will not fail," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I believe in you." He squeezed her hand, his touch conveying a silent gratitude, a shared understanding, a bond that transcended the dangers that lay ahead. They reached the monastery as dusk was settling, the ancient stone building shrouded in a mystical twilight. The monastery was a haven of peace and tranquility, a place of quiet contemplation, a refuge from the turmoil of the outside world. Brother Thomas greeted them warmly, his face etched with wisdom and compassion, his eyes twinkling with an inner light. He led them to a small, sparsely furnished chamber, where a fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the stone walls. Sir Hugh explained the situation, outlining the conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Markham, the threat to Whitmore, the need to retrieve the incriminating letter from Markham's private chambers. Brother Thomas listened intently, his expression grave, his silence a testament to the weight of the information he was receiving. "This is a grave matter," he said, his voice low and solemn. "Lord Markham is a powerful and dangerous adversary. He has the king's ear, his trust. To challenge him is to risk everything." "I know," Sir Hugh said, his voice firm, "but I have no choice. I must expose his treachery. I must protect my king, my realm, my wife." The last word, spoken with such emphasis, such conviction, sent a warmth through Rosamond's heart. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged her as his wife in such a personal, intimate way. Brother Thomas looked at Rosamond, his eyes filled with compassion. "And you, my child," he said, his voice gentle. "Are you prepared for the risks that lie ahead?" Rosamond nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I am," she said, her voice firm. "I will stand by my husband. I will do whatever it takes to help him." Brother Thomas smiled, a knowing smile that spoke of understanding, of acceptance, of faith. "Then you have my blessing," he said, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "And my prayers. But be warned. The path you have chosen is fraught with peril. Trust no one. Accept each other," he added. He paused, his gaze drifting towards a small, wooden chest that sat on a table in the corner of the room. "There is something I must show you," he said, his voice hesitant. "Something your father entrusted to me. Many years ago." He opened the chest and retrieved a small, leather-bound book. It was Rosamond's father's journal, the one Sir Hugh had been reading. But there was something else. A folded piece of parchment, sealed with the Whitmore crest. Brother Thomas handed the parchment to Rosamond, the movement quiet. Chapter 14. A Crown of Thorns. The parchment, sealed with the familiar falcon crest of Whitmore, felt heavy in Rosamond's hands, a tangible link to her father, a whisper from the past that held the potential to unravel the web of deceit that surrounded them. The air in Brother Thomas's chamber crackled with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the beating of Rosamond's heart. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and carefully unfolded the parchment. The writing was her father's, the familiar script bringing a wave of emotion, a pang of loss mingled with a fierce determination to protect his memory, to clear his name. The letter was addressed to Brother Thomas, dated years before her father's death, a time when the political landscape was shifting, when alliances were forged and broken, when the seeds of the current conspiracy were being sown. As Rosamund read the words, her breath caught in her throat. Her father's letter detailed a plot, a conspiracy against the king, orchestrated by Lord Markham and a faction of disgruntled nobles who sought to overthrow the monarch and install a puppet ruler on the throne. But the plot was not what Elmsworth claimed. Her father, Baron Whitmore, had discovered the plot, had gathered evidence, had planned to expose Markham and his allies. But he had been betrayed, murdered before he could act, his death framed as a battlefield casualty, a casualty of war that had served to silence him forever. The letter named names, detailed meetings, outlined the conspiracy in meticulous detail. It was the proof they needed, the evidence that could exonerate her father, expose Markham's treachery, and save Whitmore from Elmsworth's grasp. But it also placed them in even greater danger. Rosamund looked up from the letter, her eyes meeting Sir Hugh's. His expression was grim, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of anger and determination. "This changes everything," he said, his voice low and intense. "This is not just about Whitmore. It is about the king, about the realm." Brother Thomas nodded, his face etched with concern. "The letter is a powerful weapon," he said, his voice solemn. "But it is also a dangerous one. Markham will stop at nothing to protect himself. He will kill anyone who threatens to expose him. We have to get this letter to the king," Rosamund said, her voice firm, her resolve strengthened by her father's words, by the injustice of his death. "It is too dangerous," Sir Hugh said, his voice filled with concern. "Markham has spies everywhere. He will be watching us." "We have no choice," Rosamund insisted. "We cannot let Markham succeed. We cannot let him destroy the kingdom." "I will take it," Sir Hugh said, always protective. "No," Rosamund said, her gaze meeting his, her hand reaching out to grasp his. "We will do it together." They decided on a plan, a daring and dangerous gambit that would require courage, cunning, and a great deal of luck. Rosamund, disguised as a simple serving woman, would accompany Sir Hugh to the king's court, posing as part of his retinue. They would seek an audience with the king, present the letter, and expose Markham's treachery. But as they made their preparations, a sense of foreboding settled over Rosamund, a premonition of danger, a feeling that they were walking into a trap. The stakes were higher than ever, the risks greater than they had ever imagined. Before they departed, Brother Thomas offered them a blessing, his words a prayer for protection, for guidance, for strength. "Go with God," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "And may the light of truth guide your path." As they rode away from the monastery, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees casting long, ominous shadows, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a raven. Rosamund felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of being watched, a feeling that the eyes of their enemies were upon them. The weight of her father's letter, the burden of their mission, the uncertainty of their future all pressed down on her, a crown of thorns that pierced her heart, a symbol of the sacrifices they were prepared to make, for loyalty, for love, for the truth. She gripped the reins, looking forward. Chapter 15. The Unveiling of Truth. The king's court was a maelstrom of activity, a glittering facade masking a labyrinth of intrigue and hidden agendas. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and power, the sounds of music and laughter a constant backdrop to the whispered conversations, the furtive glances, the subtle machinations of courtiers vying for favor and influence. Rosamund, disguised as a serving woman, felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being an outsider, a pawn in a game she did not fully understand. Sir Hugh, with his knightly bearing and his reputation for loyalty, moved through the court with a quiet confidence, his presence commanding respect, his gray eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, alert to any sign of danger. He had secured an audience with the king, a brief opportunity to present their case, to expose Markham's treachery, to save Whitmore and, perhaps, the realm itself. Rosamund, keeping to the shadows, observed the courtiers, their elaborate costumes, their carefully crafted masks of politeness, their veiled expressions that hinted at hidden motives and unspoken alliances. She saw Lord Markham, the king's advisor, a tall, imposing figure with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to pierce through any pretense. He moved through the court with an air of authority, his presence commanding deference, his words carrying weight. She also saw Lady Isolde, a fleeting glimpse across the crowded hall. Isolde looked pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of anxiety and fear. She avoided Rosamund's gaze, her movements hesitant, her presence a silent reminder of the complex web of relationships and betrayals that define the court. The audience with the king was scheduled for the late afternoon, a brief window of opportunity in the monarch's busy schedule. Sir Hugh and Rosamund waited in an antechamber, their tension palpable, their anticipation mixed with a growing sense of dread. As the time approached, Sir Hugh turned to Rosamund, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of concern and affection. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low and quiet. "And be careful. Markham will be watching." Rosamund nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She had come this far, had risked everything to expose the truth, to protect her father's memory, to save Whitmore, to stand by the man she had grown to love. They were ushered into the king's presence, a grand chamber adorned with tapestries and portraits, the air thick with the scent of incense and the weight of power. The king, a weary-looking man with tired eyes and a crown that seemed to weigh heavily on his head, sat on a raised throne, surrounded by his advisors, including Lord Markham. Sir Hugh approached the throne, bowing low, his movements respectful, his demeanor confident. Rosamund, keeping to the background, observed the scene, her eyes darting from the king to Markham, her senses alert to any sign of danger. "Your Majesty," Sir Hugh began, his voice clear and strong. "I have come before you today to present evidence of a grave conspiracy, a plot against your throne, orchestrated by one of your most trusted advisors." He paused, his gaze meeting Markham's. Markham's expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating, his demeanor calm and composed. "I speak of Lord Markham," Sir Hugh continued, his voice unwavering. "I have proof of his treachery, a letter written by his own hand, detailing his plans to overthrow you and install a puppet ruler on the throne." A gasp rippled through the court, the assembled nobles and advisors exchanging shocked glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. The king looked at Markham, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and disappointment. "Markham," he said, his voice low and strained. "Is this true?" Markham stepped forward, his demeanor calm and confident, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "This is a fabrication, a lie concocted by Sir Hugh and his accomplice." He gestured towards Rosamund, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating malice. "This woman is not a serving woman. She is Lady Rosamund of Whitmore, Sir Hugh's wife. They are both traitors, plotting against you, seeking to undermine your authority." Rosamund felt a surge of fear, a sense of being exposed, of being trapped. But she stood her ground, her gaze meeting Markham's, her chin held high. Sir Hugh stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The letter will speak for itself, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm. "It is here in my possession." He reached into his tunic, retrieving the folded parchment, her father's letter, the evidence that could expose Markham's treachery, the proof that could save them all. But as he held out the letter, a sudden commotion erupted. A group of guards, loyal to Markham, moved to intercept him, their swords drawn, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. The unveiling of truth had triggered a desperate, deadly response. Chapter 16. Beneath a Sky of Ashes. The sudden eruption of violence shattered the tense atmosphere of the king's court. The clash of steel, the shouts of men, The gasps of the assembled courtiers all combined to create a cacophony of chaos and fear. Rosamund, caught in the midst of the melee, felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to survive, to protect herself, to protect Sir Hugh. Sir Hugh, a seasoned warrior, reacted instantly, drawing his sword, his movements swift and decisive. He deflected the blows of the attacking guards, his blade a blur of motion, his eyes focused, his expression grim. He fought with a skill and courage born of years of training, his determination fueled by a desperate need to protect Rosamund, to present the evidence, to expose Markham's treachery. Rosamund, though trained in the use of a dagger, was no match for the armed guards. She ducked and weaved, avoiding their blows, her heart pounding with fear, her mind racing, searching for a way to help Sir Hugh, to turn the tide of the battle. She saw an opportunity, a moment of vulnerability, in one of the guards. She lunged forward, her dagger flashing in the dim light, striking the guard in the arm, causing him to drop his sword. The distraction gave Sir Hugh a brief advantage. He pressed his attack, forcing the guards back, creating a space between himself and the king. "Your Majesty," he shouted, his voice ringing out above the din of battle. "The letter. Read the letter. It is the proof of Markham's treachery." The king, his face pale with shock and confusion, looked from Sir Hugh to Markham, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and doubt. Markham, seeing his plot unraveling, his power slipping away, made a desperate move. He lunged towards the king, his hand reaching for a hidden dagger, his intention clear to silence the monarch, to seize control, to plunge the realm into chaos. But Rosamund, reacting instinctively, threw herself in front of the king, shielding him with her body, her arms outstretched, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. Markham's dagger struck her, not fatally, but a glancing blow to her shoulder, the sharp blade tearing through her disguise, drawing blood, staining her simple gown a crimson red. The sight of Rosamund, wounded and bleeding, spurred Sir Hugh to a furious rage. He roared, a primal sound of anger and grief, and charged towards Markham, his sword a whirlwind of steel, his movements fueled by a desperate need for revenge. He disarmed Markham with a swift, brutal strike, his sword point pressing against Markham's throat, his eyes blazing with fury. "You will pay for this, Markham," he growled, his voice filled with a cold, deadly rage. But before he could deliver the final blow, the king's loyal guards intervened, surrounding Markham, their swords pointed at his heart. "Enough," the king commanded, his voice trembling with emotion. "Hold him. I will hear the evidence." The fighting ceased, the chaos subsiding, leaving behind a stunned silence, broken only by Rosamund's ragged breathing and the dripping of blood from her wound. Sir Hugh rushed to her side, his face etched with concern, his hands trembling as he examined her injury. "Rosamund," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "Are you all right?" She managed a weak smile, her face pale, her eyes filled with pain, but also with a fierce, unwavering love. "I am alive," she said, her voice barely audible. "The letter, did you give it to the king?" Sir Hugh nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "He has it. He is reading it now." The king, his face ashen, his hands trembling, finished reading the letter. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, horror, and betrayal. "Markham," he said, his voice cold and deadly. "You are a traitor. You have betrayed your king, your realm, your oaths." Markham, his face a mask of defeat, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating despair, said nothing. He knew he was finished, his plot exposed, his power shattered. The king ordered Markham's arrest, his imprisonment, his trial for treason. He thanked Sir Hugh and Rosamund for their courage, their loyalty, their sacrifice. He ordered his own physicians to tend to Rosamund's wound, his voice filled with concern and gratitude. As Rosamund was being treated, the sky outside turned a strange, ominous gray, the color of ashes, a reflection of the turmoil that had engulfed the court, a symbol of the darkness that had been exposed, a premonition of the challenges that still lay ahead. The truth had been unveiled, but the battle was far from over. She felt it. Chapter 17. The Lionheart's Return. The aftermath of the confrontation at the king's court was a period of both healing and upheaval. Rosamund, her wound tended to by the royal physicians, slowly recovered her strength, her body bearing a scar, a permanent reminder of her courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering loyalty to Sir Hugh and to the truth. Sir Hugh, his reputation enhanced by his bravery, his unwavering commitment to the king, remained at court, assisting in the investigation of Markham's conspiracy, helping to root out the remaining traitors, to restore stability to the realm. The news of Markham's treachery and his subsequent arrest sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The revelation that the king's most trusted advisor had been plotting against him, that the very foundations of the realm had been threatened, shook the faith of many, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. But the swift and decisive action taken by the king, aided by Sir Hugh and Rosamund, helped to restore order, to reassure the populace, to demonstrate that justice would be served, that the traitors would be punished. Markham's trial was swift and public, a demonstration of the king's resolve, a warning to any who would dare to challenge his authority. The evidence presented, including Rosamund's father's letter and Lady Isolde's testimony delivered from a safe distance under the protection of Sir Hugh's men, was irrefutable. Markham was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death, his execution a stark reminder of the consequences of betrayal. As the dust settled, the king summoned Sir Hugh and Rosamund to his private chambers. He thanked them again for their courage, their loyalty, their service to the crown. "You have saved my kingdom," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have exposed a darkness that threatened to consume us all. I am forever in your debt." He bestowed upon Sir Hugh the title of Lionheart, a recognition of his bravery, his unwavering commitment to justice, his fierce protection of the realm. He also granted them a royal pardon for Rosamund's father, clearing his name, restoring his honor, erasing the stain of Elmsworth's fabricated accusations. Rosamund, standing beside Sir Hugh, felt a surge of pride, a sense of accomplishment, a deep and abiding love for the man who had risked everything to protect her father's memory, to protect the kingdom. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "We did only what was right. We defended the truth. We stood by our oaths." The king smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his weary face, making him look younger, less burdened. "You are both examples of true nobility," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You are the kind of people this kingdom needs. The kind of people I am proud to call my subjects my friends." He paused, his gaze meeting Sir Hugh's. "I have a request," he said, his voice turning serious. "I need your help. I need your strength, your wisdom, your loyalty. I need you to remain at court, to serve as my advisor, to help me rebuild this kingdom, to ensure that such a treachery never happens again." Sir Hugh hesitated, his gaze drifting towards Rosamund. He had longed to return to Whitmore, to the peace and quiet of his ancestral home, to a life away from the intrigues and dangers of the court. But he also knew his duty, his obligation to the king, to the realm. Rosamund, understanding his dilemma, placed her hand on his arm, her touch conveying her support, her understanding, her love. "We will serve, Your Majesty," she said, her voice firm, her gaze meeting the king's. "We will stand by your side. We will help you rebuild this kingdom. We will do whatever it takes." Sir Hugh nodded, his gray eyes meeting hers, his expression conveying his gratitude, his acceptance, his love. "We will serve," he echoed, his voice filled with conviction. And so, Sir Hugh and Rosamund remained at court, their lives intertwined with the fate of the kingdom, their love a beacon of hope in a world of shadows and intrigue, their courage a testament to the enduring power of truth and loyalty. They had faced the darkness together, had emerged victorious, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured, their future uncertain, but filled with a shared purpose, a shared commitment, a shared love that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The Lionheart had returned to his rightful place. A new chapter was being written. Chapter 18. A Dance of Deception. Life at court, even after Markham's treachery was exposed, was a delicate dance of deception, a constant negotiation of power, influence, and hidden agendas. Rosamund, though initially wary of the court's intricacies, found herself adapting to its demands, her natural intelligence and her quiet strength proving to be valuable assets in navigating its treacherous currents. She became a trusted confidant of the Queen, her counsel sought on matters of both personal and political significance. Sir Hugh, as the king's advisor, shouldered the heavy responsibility of helping to rebuild the kingdom, of restoring trust in the monarchy, of rooting out any lingering remnants of Markham's conspiracy. He worked tirelessly, his dedication unwavering, his judgment sound, his loyalty to the king absolute. But he also faced opposition, resistance from those who had benefited from Markham's patronage, from those who resented his influence, from those who still harbored secret ambitions of their own. One evening, a grand ball was held at the court, a celebration of the kingdom's newfound stability, a display of unity and strength intended to reassure both the nobles and the foreign dignitaries who were in attendance. Rosamund, dressed in a gown of deep blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread depicting the Whitmore falcon and the Fitzalan lion, now intertwined, moved through the crowded ballroom with a grace and elegance that belied her inner turmoil. She observed the courtiers, their elaborate costumes, their carefully crafted smiles, their veiled expressions that hinted at hidden motives and unspoken alliances. She saw the whispers, the furtive glances, the subtle gestures that spoke of intrigue and deception. She knew that even in the midst of celebration, danger still lurked, that the shadows of the past still cast a long reach over the present. She danced with Sir Hugh, their movements synchronized, their bodies close, their eyes meeting across the crowded room. She felt the warmth of his hand on her waist, the strength of his arm around her, the silent communication that passed between them, a bond forged in fire, tested by adversity, strengthened by love. "Are you happy, Rosamund?" he asked, his voice low and intimate, his gray eyes searching hers. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, transforming her face, making her look radiant, even in the midst of the court's artificial splendor. "I am content," she said, her voice equally low. "I am with you. That is all that matters." He squeezed her hand, his touch conveying a silent gratitude, a shared understanding, a love that transcended the words they spoke. But as they danced, Rosamund noticed a figure lurking in the shadows, a man she recognized as Lord Ashworth, the nobleman who had hosted the tournament where she had first glimpsed the undercurrents of intrigue and betrayal. Ashworth was watching them, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating malice, his expression a mixture of resentment and something else, something she could not quite decipher. She felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition of danger, a sense that the past was not yet buried, that the shadows of Markham's conspiracy still lingered, that new threats were emerging from the darkness. Later that evening, as the ball was winding down, Rosamund found herself alone with Lady Isolde, who had also been invited to the court, a gesture of reconciliation, a symbol of the king's desire to heal the divisions that had plagued the realm. Isolde looked pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. She seemed to be carrying a heavy burden, a secret that weighed on her soul. "Rosamund," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to talk to you. It is important." Rosamund led her to a small, secluded alcove, a private space where they could speak without being overheard. "What is it, Isolde?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Isolde hesitated, her gaze darting around nervously, as if she feared being watched. "It is about Lord Ashworth," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He is planning something. Something terrible." Rosamund's heart pounded with apprehension. She had sensed Ashworth's animosity, his resentment, his hidden agenda. "What is he planning?" she asked, her voice urgent. Isolde took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Rosamund's. "He is in league with Elmsworth," she said, her voice barely audible. They are plotting to overthrow the king, to take Whitmore, to destroy everything you and Hugh have worked for." The words, spoken with such conviction, froze her. The dance of deception continued, the music masking the whispers of conspiracy, the smiles concealing the daggers of betrayal. Rosamund knew that she had to act, had to warn Sir Hugh, had to protect the king, had to save the fragile peace that they had fought so hard to achieve. The night was young, and the music continued. Chapter 19. The Sword's Edge. The revelation of Lord Ashworth's renewed treachery, his alliance with Elmsworth, cast a dark shadow over the fragile peace that Sir Hugh and Rosamund had fought so hard to achieve. The glittering facade of the court, the smiles and celebrations, seemed to mock the underlying danger, the constant threat that lurked beneath the surface. Rosamund, armed with Lady Isolde's warning, knew that she had to act swiftly, decisively, to protect everything she held dear. She sought out Sir Hugh, finding him in the king's war room, poring over maps and reports, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The room was a stark contrast to the opulent ballroom, a reminder of the constant vigilance required to maintain peace, to defend the realm against its enemies. "Hugh," she said, her voice urgent, her heart pounding with apprehension. "We have a problem. A serious problem." He looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers, his expression instantly alert, his senses attuned to the urgency in her voice. "What is it, Rosamund?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. She recounted her conversation with Lady Isolde, revealing Ashworth's alliance with Elmsworth, their plot to overthrow the king, to seize Whitmore, to destroy everything they had worked for. Sir Hugh listened intently, his face hardening, his eyes turning cold and calculating. The news was a blow, a confirmation of his own suspicions, a reminder that the enemies of the realm were relentless, that the battle for peace was never truly over. "We have to warn the king," he said, his voice decisive. "We have to prepare for war." They went to the king immediately, presenting their evidence, outlining the threat posed by Ashworth and Elmsworth. The king, though initially shocked and angered by the news, listened carefully, his trust in Sir Hugh and Rosamund unwavering. He ordered the immediate arrest of Lord Ashworth, sending his loyal guards to apprehend the traitor before he could escape. He also mobilized his army, preparing for a potential conflict with Elmsworth, sending messengers to his allies, calling upon them to honor their oaths and stand by his side. But Ashworth, anticipating their move, had already fled the court, escaping with a small band of loyal followers, seeking refuge with Elmsworth, their conspiracy now out in the open, their intentions clear. The kingdom was plunged into a state of war, the lines drawn, the battle lines set. Sir Hugh, as the king's chief military advisor, took command of the royal army, preparing for a confrontation with Elmsworth and his forces. Rosamund, though fearful for his safety, supported him wholeheartedly, her courage unwavering, her love a source of strength and inspiration. Before he rode off to battle, Sir Hugh sought her out in their private chambers, his face etched with concern, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. "Rosamund," he said, his voice low and intimate, "I do not know what the future holds. This war, it will be dangerous. I may not return." She reached out and took his hand, her touch conveying her love, her support, her unwavering belief in him. "You will return," she said, her voice firm, her gaze meeting his. "I know you will. You are the Lionheart. You are my husband. You are my love." He squeezed her hand, his touch conveying a silent gratitude, a shared understanding, a bond that transcended the dangers that lay ahead. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of longing, of farewell. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of a future together, a hope that they would survive the coming storm, that they would emerge victorious, that their love would endure. As he rode away with his army, Rosamund stood at the window, watching him disappear into the distance, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and pride. She knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, that the outcome was uncertain, that the fate of the kingdom hung in the balance. But she also knew that Sir Hugh would fight with courage and honor, that he would do everything in his power to protect her, to protect their home, to protect the realm. She stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle, the sun setting on a kingdom poised on the sword's edge, a kingdom teetering between peace and war, between hope and despair. She prayed for a safe return, for victory, for a future where they could finally be together, free from the shadows of the past, free from the threats of the present, free to live their lives, to share their love, to build a future worthy of the sacrifices they had made. The wind howled outside. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The war against Elmsworth and his allies was a brutal and protracted conflict, a test of strength, courage, and resilience. Sir Hugh, leading the king's forces, fought with a fierce determination, his strategic brilliance, and his unwavering commitment to his men earning him the respect and admiration of his troops. He faced Elmsworth on the battlefield several times, their encounters marked by a personal animosity, a clash of wills that mirrored the larger conflict between loyalty and treachery. Rosamund, remaining at court, shouldered the heavy responsibility of managing the kingdom's affairs, of maintaining morale, of providing support for the war effort. She worked tirelessly, her intelligence and her quiet strength proving to be invaluable assets in navigating the complex political landscape, in dealing with the anxieties and uncertainties of a realm at war. She also kept in close contact with Lady Isolde, who, despite her own precarious position, continued to provide valuable intelligence, risking her life to help them defeat Elmsworth and Ashworth. The war raged for months, the tide turning back and forth, victory and defeat alternating in a bloody dance of death and destruction. The land was scarred by battle, the fields soaked in blood, the villages ravaged by fire and sword. The cost of the conflict was high, the sacrifices immense, the future uncertain. Finally, after a long and arduous campaign, the king's forces, led by Sir Hugh, achieved a decisive victory. Elmsworth was killed in battle, his forces scattered, his rebellion crushed. Ashworth was captured, his treachery exposed, his fate sealed. Sir Hugh returned to court, victorious but weary, his body bearing the scars of battle, his heart heavy with the losses he had witnessed, the sacrifices he had made. Rosamund rushed to meet him, her heart overflowing with relief and love, her eyes filled with tears of joy. They embraced, a long, passionate embrace that spoke of reunion, of survival, of a love that had endured the trials of war, the separation, the constant threat of loss. "You are safe," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You are home." He held her close, his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her hair. "I am home," he echoed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "And I am yours. Forever." The king, grateful for Sir Hugh's victory, rewarded him handsomely, bestowing upon him lands and titles, recognizing his service to the crown, his unwavering loyalty, his courage in the face of adversity. But for Sir Hugh, the greatest reward was Rosamund, the woman who had stood by his side, the woman who had believed in him, the woman who had captured his heart. With the war over, the kingdom began the long process of healing and rebuilding. Sir Hugh and Rosamund, working together, helped to restore order, to promote justice, to ensure that the realm would never again be threatened by such treachery. They returned to Whitmore, their ancestral home, now a symbol of their resilience, their love, their commitment to each other and to their people. One evening, as they stood together on the castle ramparts, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Sir Hugh turned to Rosamund, his gray eyes filled with a deep and abiding love. "Rosamund," he said, his voice low and intimate, "I have loved you from the moment I saw the fire in your eyes that first day, when all you did was cry and present a facade. I feigned indifference because I did not know how to win your heart. But I have loved you even before that, when I simply knew of you." She smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her face, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "And I," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I have loved you since I do not know when. Perhaps since the moment you defended me against Lady Beatrice's cruel words. Perhaps since the moment you showed me your father's journal, revealing your vulnerability, your pain. Perhaps since the moment you were willing to risk everything for me, for Whitmore, for the truth. They embraced, their love a beacon of hope in a world that had known so much darkness, their bond a testament to the enduring power of courage, loyalty, and devotion. They had faced the reckoning of love and duty, had emerged victorious, their hearts intertwined, their future bright, their love a story for the ages. They looked to the future. Epilogue. Years passed, and Whitmore Castle, once a place of shadows and uncertainty, became a haven of peace and prosperity. Sir Hugh and Lady Rosamund ruled wisely and justly, their love for each other and for their people a guiding light, a source of strength and inspiration. They were blessed with children, a son and a daughter, who grew up strong and brave, inheriting their parents' courage, their loyalty, their unwavering commitment to truth and justice. The scars of the past remained, reminders of the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the treachery overcome. But they served not as sources of pain, but as symbols of resilience, of the enduring power of love and hope. Rosamund's shoulder, where Markham's dagger had struck, bore a faint, silver line, a mark of honor, a testament to her bravery. Sir Hugh's eyes, though still carrying a hint of sadness, reflected a newfound peace, a contentment born of a life well lived, a love deeply cherished. Lady Isolde, having played her part in bringing down Elmswith and Ashworth, found sanctuary in a secluded convent, dedicating her life to prayer and contemplation, finding solace in a world far removed from the intrigues and betrayals of the court. She and Rosamund maintained a correspondence, their letters a testament to a friendship forged in adversity, a bond that transcended the past. Brother Thomas continued his quiet work at the monastery, offering guidance and wisdom to those who sought it, his life a testament to the enduring power of faith and compassion. He remained a trusted friend and advisor to Sir Hugh and Rosamund, his presence a constant reminder of the importance of truth and justice. As the years turned into decades, Sir Hugh and Rosamund grew old together, their love deepening with time, their bond unbreakable, their lives a testament to the enduring power of commitment and devotion. They walked hand in hand through the castle gardens, their footsteps echoing the footsteps of generations past, their presence a blessing on the land they had fought so hard to protect. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the ancient stone walls of Whitmore, Sir Hugh and Rosamund stood together on the ramparts, watching the world fade into twilight. They were old now, their bodies frail, their steps slow, but their love remained as strong as ever, a beacon of hope in a world that had known so much darkness. Sir Hugh turned to Rosamund, his gray eyes, though dimmed by age, still filled with a deep and abiding love. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, his fingers intertwined with hers. "Rosamund," he said, his voice soft but firm. "My love, my life, my everything." She smiled, her face wrinkled but radiant, her eyes sparkling with a love that had endured the test of time. "Hugh," she said, her voice equally soft. "My knight, my protector, my heart." They stood there for a long moment, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating as one, their love a silent testament to a life well lived, a bond unbreakable, a story for the ages. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, a final, glorious farewell to a day that had been filled with love, with peace, with the quiet joy of a life shared, a future secured, a legacy fulfilled. They turned and, together, walked back inside.